I'm going to be covering what you need to know when it comes to managing your calories for a successful fat loss. Hi, my name is Nick Hediatpour, also known as the Strength Artist. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in this video we're going to continue with our fat loss nutrition series. In the previous video we talked about the importance of calories. We also talked about the pyramid when it comes to fat loss. What are some of the important elements that we cannot neglect if we want to have a sustainable and rapid fat loss? So if you haven't watched that, I'll put the link below. Make sure you guys watch that and then come back and continue with this video. Now, when it comes to calories, we remember that just because they're at the base of the pyramid doesn't make them the most important one. Even though they have a big influence on the outcome of fat loss, doesn't mean that you should neglect things like macronutrients or micronutrients. Everything is important, and that's the kind of mindset I want you guys to have when it comes to approaching a fat loss nutrition. Now, since they have one of the biggest influence on the outcome of fat loss, it would be a good place for us to start, and that's exactly what we talked about in the previous video. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about management of those calories. Now, remember that in the previous video, I mentioned that you guys have to find a way to track your food. Of course, you don't want to be obsessed with it, and you don't want to go to an extent where you have to, measure food at all times. But at least initially, especially if you're a beginner, you have to do this, because what gets measured gets managed. And as a beginner, you have no business doing intuitive eating or flexible diet approach, because you have no clue how much food you're actually taking in. So that should be reserved for advanced people, so people who have experienced dieting and training for a long time. Because once again, if you don't know how much food it's coming in, how the hell are you going to manage it? So what gets measured gets managed, and that's the mindset I want you guys to have. So at least initially, for a couple of weeks, until you sort of have an idea of how much food you're supposed to eat, portion size and meal timing on a regular basis, then you can stop tracking so diligently and eyeballing it, and intuitive eating is going to be a little bit more natural for you guys. But at the beginning, it's just not going to happen, so you have to find a way to address it. Now, in order to track food, at least initially, I recommend you guys to invest in a food scale. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go to an extent where you obsess with this scale and take it with you to a birthday dinner or to family reunion and that kind of stuff. No, you don't have to go to that extent, but at least the meals that you cook at home, you want to make sure that you use this scale to just give you an idea of how much food you're actually taking in. So weekends, dinner at home, if you make breakfast at home. So whenever you're at home, you can do that, unless you're competing and you really want to make sure that you're managing the amount of food that's going in. But as a general population trainee, it's really not that necessary. If you're tracking it most of the time, that's good enough. You don't have to do it 100% of the time. Now, once you do that, it would give you a portion size and an idea of how much food you're actually supposed to take in. Now, when it comes to measuring the actual calories, I use an application called Cronometer. Many of you who track food might have heard of MyFitnessPal. I'm not a huge fan of that, because literally someone's grandmother in a village can, input some data, because it's open source and it's open to everyone. And the data, I just haven't found it to be that accurate. Cronometer is an app that's designed by scientists and dietitians and nutrition coaches. So it's very accurate. So all that input, all the data that's in there, you are very reliable. So that's the app that I personally recommend you guys to use. And the beauty of that is that it allows for a bunch of input of data and biomarkers you can put in. If you've done blood tests, you can put it in there. The blood pressure. There's a lot of things that you guys can track. Of course, there's a free version of that, but if you want more data, you have to subscribe to the paid version, and I highly recommend you guys to do that. It's a great app. So Cronometer is something that you guys can do. Now remember, you're not going to be doing this for a very long time, especially if you're not planning to compete as a bikini athlete or a physique show or in a bodybuilding. If you just want to have an idea on how to manage your regular meals, this would be a great way to do that. So for a couple of weeks, until you're confident that, okay, I can eyeball it and make sure that I'm very close, and then you can just take up the intuitive approach to eating. So Cronometer, I highly recommend you guys to check that out. Now, in order to actually know how much you're supposed to take in, Now everybody is different, so depending on how much muscle mass you have, your daily activity, your metabolism, there's a lot of things to consider. Now this is called TDEE, total daily energy expenditure, and you have to go to this website, which I find it to be very useful. And all you have to do is put in your estimated body fat percentage, your daily activities, your age and gender, and all that kind of stuff, and it will give you a rough idea of how much you're supposed to take in. Now of course it might not be 100% accurate, but I found it to be a very good place for a starting point. Now total daily energy expenditure is calculated based off of 4 things mainly. Number 1 is your BMR, so basal metabolic rate. So this is the amount of energy your body requires for you to be able to keep functions of your liver, your brain, your heart, your tissues, basically your bodily functions and systems. The next one would be daily scheduled activity. So that would be things like going for a run and hitting the gym, for example. The next one would be NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So these are things like, okay, getting up from the chair and going to the bookshelf to pick up a book, or going downstairs to pick up something. Simple as that. And the next one would be TEF. TEF stands for thermic effect of food. When you eat food, your body requires energy to break it down and transport it to wherever it's needed and absorb it. So this is called TEF. So these are 4 factors that go into measuring the total daily energy expenditure, which you can find from the website that I mentioned earlier. I want to talk to you guys about nutritional periodization. So fancy word, but what it means is basically managing the amount of food that's going into your body for a given outcome that you're after. In training, you might have heard of periodization. So it's basically a way for you to manage fatigue and stress and be able to perform well towards the end of the cycle, right? So sometimes you do high intensity training and decrease the volume, and other times you do higher volume of training and lower intensity. So basically what's happening is that every cycle you have certain goals to go after, and you play around with those variables. Why? Because your body is a massive adaptive machine. It's very adaptable, guys. So if you just keep giving it 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10 at the same weight, it has no reason to change. And nutrition is the exact same thing. This is in fact one of the mistakes people make, because they just come up with, let's say, 20% of caloric deficit, and then they stick with it, and they might have very good results for the first few weeks, but after that they hit a plateau. Why? Because their body has adapted to it, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about. So remember that your body is an adaptive machine, so it's very important for you to learn how to play around with the amount of food as well as macronutrients that goes into it. So obviously I cannot give specific recommendations for you guys, because I have no clue about who you are and I haven't assessed you, but I just want to make you guys understand this basic concept that if you're not progressing well in your fat loss journey, it might be a good time to hire a good coach, or find a way to manage your calories. Now I want to take you guys back to our first video where I talked about the energy equation. So remember that for a successful fat loss to happen, the energy expenditure or the energy output needs to be greater than the energy going into your body. Now for a beginner, you might not even have to do a caloric deficit. You might have to just stay at baseline, so you wouldn't have to change the amount of food that you're eating, and just by increasing the daily energy expenditure through exercise and just taking your steps in, you already are going to be in a negative energy balance, and that's a good thing when it comes to weight loss and fat loss. So you don't have to suddenly start cutting and slashing your calories by 30, 40, 50%. That's really not needed as a beginner. So the more of a beginner you are, if you've never dieted before, if you've never exercised before, you shouldn't stress your body too much. So all you have to do, just increase your daily activities, and you're going to be on your way to losing fat. But when it comes to intermediate and advanced trainees, that's just going to be a little bit harder, and especially those who have dieted before. So it's going to be taking some new strategies for them to be able to keep losing fat if they're getting ready for a photo shoot, or they just want to look better and they want to get really lean. So these are some of the strategies that intermediate and advanced trainees can incorporate. Now I'm going to show you guys a case study with one of my clients. Now remember, this is something that I designed for my client specifically. I did a 1.5 hour consultation with this client, so I knew a lot of data about this client. I don't want you to blindly just go ahead and implement this into your diet, because probably it's just not going to work, because this is for my client, probably not for you. But it does a great job of teaching you the concept of nutritional periodization. Now here, this trainee was a female trainee, 20% body fat, intermediate lifter, low stress lifestyle, and trains 5 days per week. Now you can tell that since they're an intermediate trainee and they train this much, it's going to take some strategies for them to be able to have a successful fat loss. So I cannot just tell them, okay, just eat a caloric deficit for like the next 3 months and then you should be fine. No, that's not gonna happen. Why? Because they're intermediate and their body adapts much quicker as opposed to someone who is a beginner. Now if you look at the top of the screen, we have what we call a baseline. This baseline is the amount of food this trainee needs in order to maintain her body weight. So what I've done here, since this trainee is an intermediate trainee and they've dieted before, as well as trained for at least 2 years, I need to make sure that my strategy is in a way that this trainee can ongoingly lose weight and not hit a plateau. So if I were to just introduce a caloric deficit and stick to it, it would not work, because her body is much more adaptable as opposed to someone who's a beginner. So in the first 2 phases, which last from week 1 to week 5, I have a 20% caloric deficit. But here in phase 1, you can see that I have a low carb approach for her, and in phase 2 we have bumped up the amount of carbohydrates in order to make her feel better and have more energy for training. And that's why in phase 2 she has medium carb. Now when it comes to macronutrients such as fats and proteins and carbs and how I play around with them, I have made some videos for you guys which are up in the upcoming weeks, so stay tuned for that. Now remember that once again, because our number one guiding rule here is the fact that her body is highly adaptable because of the fact that she's an intermediate trainee. So here, after 5 weeks of dieting, what I've done is that I brought it back to baseline. Now, of course, I'm not pulling these numbers out of my ass and bringing it back to baseline or putting in a deficit whenever I feel like. No, there are certain biomarkers that I always track. For example, the sleep quality, mood, energy level, soreness level, recovery from training session. All these things, I'm tracking them on a regular basis, and every time I see some abnormalities in this data, I would be able to adjust it. So this is why you should not really follow what you see on the screen, because this is not designed for you. Now here, after the baseline, we're going back down to a 25% deficit. So from 20% to baseline, and now a little bit greater deficit, and I've maintained the carbs at medium level, and then we go back to baseline. And as you can see, as we progress in this 12-week cycle, I am playing around with the amount of food a little bit more closely. So for example, here phase 3 lasts only for 1 week, and then phase 4 only lasts for 1 week, as opposed to the first 2 phases where the caloric deficit was maintained for a complete 5 weeks period. Now here, phase 5, which I have brought it back to baseline, and then the last 3 weeks we went really hard, and then we increased the caloric deficit down to 30%, which this client obviously can handle. And that went on for 3 weeks, so we really went hard on the last week, and also increasing her training volume. Now once again, remember that this is not designed for you, this is designed for one of my clients, and I've kept track of the data as well as the training that goes along with each training phase, so they go hand in hand. But the idea here was just to show you that you need to be able to manage your calories based on your training level. So to recap, as a beginner, you don't really need to get into a caloric deficit to begin with. So for example, for the first 3 to 4 weeks, just as an example, you could maintain your baseline, and just by increasing your energy expenditure through exercise and getting your steps in, you're on your way to losing fat. And after 4 weeks, what you can do is to start implementing a linear approach of caloric deficit. And for a beginner, I wouldn't recommend anything more than 20% of caloric deficit. So for example, 1 month you would get down to 10%, and the next month you would get down to 20% of caloric deficit. So a linear approach, if you've never dieted before, if you've never trained before, is going to work really well as a beginner. But that's just not going to work with the advanced training or intermediate training, as you saw in this example, that I had to play around not only with the amount of food, but also with the duration at which I keep this particular client at a deficit and back to baseline, while making sure that the training that is prescribed to her is going hand in hand with what we have here. And not to mention, or not to forget, that the biomarkers are always being tracked on a regular basis, because I'm a huge fan of making sure that the trainee stays as healthy as possible, because I'm not a fan of going too extreme, something that we see that a lot of trainees do, and they're so desperate to lose a lot of fat fast because they don't plan properly long term, and they end up just thinking about that short-term mentality and really wrecking up their body. So you want to make sure that you have a good mid-term and long-term plan, and that's exactly why I wanted to share with you guys the concept of nutritional periodization. The ideal rate of fat loss or weight loss would be 0.5 to 1% of total body weight on a weekly basis. So just to give you an example, if you're 100 kilos, you should be able to lose anywhere from 0.5 to 1 kg per week. Now, of course, if you're new to dieting, or especially if you follow a low carb approach to begin with, because of the water retention and the fact that your body is going to lose a lot of water, you're going to be a little bit faster. So you might end up losing 2 to 3%, but that's fine. After 2 to 3 weeks, that's going to be stabilized. But anytime after that, an 0.5 to 1% of body weight is the ideal number. If you're going too fast, there's a chance that you're losing muscle mass. Now remember, the goal of a fat loss training cycle is to make sure that you preserve muscle mass as much as possible. So if you're losing fat faster than 0.5 to 1% of body weight on a weekly basis, if it's faster than that, the chances are you're losing muscle mass, and that's dangerous. You do not want to go down that road. That's it, guys. We have come to the end of this video. So obviously this is not a fat loss nutrition course, and there's so much more to cover, but I just wanted to share with you some of the basic concepts that you need to understand when it comes to caloric management, so that you are on the right path when it comes to fat loss. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. In the upcoming video, I'm going to be talking about the second layer of the pyramid, which is macronutrients, and we're going to kick it off with protein. So see you guys there.